My name is Betty Yu, and I'm originally from New York City, born and raised, and I'm based in New York City, in Brooklyn, New York. I was raised in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, in a neighborhood that is primarily Latino and Chinese immigrants, and my parents still live there. So for me, uh, the creative mediums and the my artistic practice has really evolved and changed over the years. I actually started in film and video production over 20 years ago, making mainly short and long form documentaries, really highlighting issues of social inequality, racial injustice, usually rooted in a community, like the community that I live in, for instance, grew up in Sunset Park. Um, I've made documentaries about the gentrification that is happening in this neighborhood, and also I've made in the past have made labor rights and labor organizing short films. My parents are garment workers, and I sort of documented the plight of Asian and Latino immigrant garment workers who are fighting for better conditions in Chinatown and throughout New York City, and really calling to end exploitative labor and sweatshop conditions. And so from that, that's evolved into integrating more multimedia forms, including augmented reality, VR, 360 video, web-based platforms, as well as installation. So I've done a lot more installation work in the past several years, as well as just a more socially engaged practice where I'm working with community members to co-create work, co-create pieces, because I think a big part of my work, a huge principle, is actually, making sure that their stories are represented in a way where they have some kind of creative control and are able to represent their own story. And self-determination is a big cornerstone of my work. That I believe that too often people have told our stories, people of color, or women, or immigrant folks, that stories are often told about them too many times. The sort of dominant narrative of marginalized communities are written about them, and they don't have a say. And so a big part of my work is about self-representation. So working with communities to sort of co-create something is, and community, I mean, whether it's my family, that's my community, or a larger community like Chinatown, making sure that we are working in a collaborative way. And so that has kind of evolved, and more recently I've been integrating more digital arts and digital collage, as well as photography, into the work, into the mix. So my family was a part of the first wave of Chinese American families to move into Sunset Park back in the 1970s. Asian residents have been the fastest growing group in that neighborhood, and I was lucky to have grown up at a time where families, working class families like my family, were able to actually pull money together with other family members to actually buy a home. And that's just not possible today, right? With the housing boom and the prices that have just skyrocketed. However, those Chinese residents that have made Sunset Park what it is, and just even throughout the city, local residents that made their communities what they are, these residents are at risk, and there are plans underway to gentrify the neighborhood, like the one I grew up in Sunset Park, where my parents still reside. And developers have been pushing to change zoning and land use laws, and it really is visible at this time. Developers are demolishing low structures, two-story homes, to build taller luxury housing, and other kinds of services, providing services that is out of reach, both price-wise and not necessarily that aligned with the needs of the community. And so my own block is being transformed. The block I grew up on, literally, even during this pandemic, lots of new luxury housing is being built. So Sunset Park, we know, is just a microcosm of what's happening all around the city and beyond. And so the exhibition, I hope, really highlights and celebrates the artists and cultural workers that are at play behind gentrification, racialized capitalism, and land occupation. The show is about forging a new trajectory of exploitation can be disrupted, right? That's not inevitable. So drawing inspiration from anti-gentrification resistance across the US, movements for racial justice and Afrofuturism, these these various movements and platforms for imagination has really informed this exhibition and explores ways in which socially just futures can exist for our communities. And I really hope that this exhibition creates a generative space for dialogue and engagement and reflection. The exhibition challenges us to envision a liberated future while recognizing that it is also inextricably tied to the past. So my two pieces that are in the show, one of them is called 2020 De-Gentrified Manifesto for 2050. So it was originally supposed to be a sort of 360 VR experience where you put goggles on and you would experience this through goggles. But of course, in a pandemic world, that's not possible. No one's picking up glasses at a public space or gallery and engaging with that. So I had to figure out how to translate it into a flat experience on two screens. And so basically, the piece really is starting with starts with a sort of more dystopian present, which I think and when you watch and listen to the piece, it assumes a really sort of dystopic trajectory where we're at a time where we sort of are put into a place where real estate and capitalism really has just completely taken over and has really ejected and evicted any semblance of working class culture. And it starts with that. It starts with placing people in my parents' home and what's been happening, which is the sort of like literally construction going on around the neighborhood, and gentrification even happening with this pandemic. And then it goes into sort of this dystopic future of real estate having taken over. And that sort of goes into sort of a time warp going back to 1969, where actually New Communities, which is an organization, it was a community land trust that was the first one that was in the country that was created by Black farmers, and it's collectively owned and operated from 1969 to 1985. And so just to say that was a huge huge deal in the country, and also for African American communities, because this is sort of the first time that African Americans actually owned a large entity of land against the steepest odds of racism, and in the midst of the struggle for civil rights in the Deep South. And so what they end up owning together was as big as the state of Rhode Island. So it was quite big. And so now there are 225 community land trusts across the country. But just to say that that's sort of the backdrop, and then it fast forwards to 2050, and 2050, of course, is a brighter future where we are able to have equality in every sense, including housing. Everyone, that housing is a human right. And so it's just this idea of using using art and culture in this way to unleash our imagination and to allow us to imagine, and give us permission to do that. And this piece allowed me to do that, and to think about what is it that we're working toward. And then the other piece that is there is it's sort of for digital photographs that are manipulated. And the first one is not manipulated. It's actually my parents looking at a condo construction going on right next door to their home. And then the three other images after that is being transformed into what kind of intervention can be had, which is transforming this block and really our society into a place that housing is a human right for everyone. And so you'll see the sort of, it gets brighter and then the colors and then lots of green. And then at the end, housing is a human right is in Chinese and in English on the property that used to be a condo. So it's called Degentrifying My Parents' Block. So that's the other piece that is there. That is, this show has really been an eye-opener to really hear how other artists imagine ways that we can kind of imagine a degentrified future that is tied with all the issues that we care about, right? So it means it's tied with decolonization, it's tied with eradicating systemic racism. It's tied with all these issues, and in many ways, those underlying issues have to happen before we even get to housing equity, right? Before we even get to a place where shelter and a basic living wage is a right that we just inherently have. So I've learned a lot through this show itself, and I think that for me, the putting together this reader called it's called a Radical Housing Manifestos, where about 10 artists, activists, urban planners contributed pieces, writing, poetry, images to what a degentrified future could look like. And there were some prompts given to them. And even reading that was really, really sort of inspiring and eye-opening and insightful. And so I think that just this obviously there's no real answer here, but it's more the process of asking this question and seeing where it takes people. And so, you know, our reality is obviously we're living in New York City, and artists who are the artists in the show who are working in their respective cities, LA and Philly, we're seeing hyper-gentrification in these cities by real estate developers, right? And so people being displaced, there's homelessness is on the rise. So what can we learn from past histories and you know, from organizations like New Communities that started a community land trust in 1969? What are the things that we can learn from it? And what are the ways we can build assets on the land and continue to have it serve the community, right? And of course, it looks different everywhere. So, you know, I want to imagine a world that is a world where, you know, vulture capitalism doesn't exist. No such thing as predatory loans, mortgages that are worth more than homes, and banks that are designed to exploit and extract. Where there's an abundance of housing, where there's enough beautiful green space for everyone to enjoy, right? Where real estate developers and slumlords are obsolete. A reality where every single person earns a living wage. A world where we live, a world where we work to live and enjoy life rather than live to work to barely survive. So, you know, sort of these are the things I've been thinking about, right? The artists in the show, as well as other creators in the show, have really provided some interesting insight on how we can get there. And even the process of thinking about it, we can also decolonize our own minds